There's a special place in my heart for horror stories. You get sort of a second-hand adrenaline rush from whatever the characters are going through, all from the safety of your home. And comic books have always been at the forefront of the horror genre. Comics like Tales from the Crypt by EC Comics kept the comic book industry alive after the collapse of the Golden Age, and this boom lasted until the medium was smacked by the Comic Code Authority. But this didn't entirely stop them from telling horror stories. They just had to be less graphic. A little-known comic publisher called Atlas Comics was notorious for its series like Adventures into Terror and Astonishing, which eventually moved on to Tales to Astonish and Journey into Mystery as Atlas Comics became Marvel Comics. If those last two series sounded familiar, issue 13 of Tales to Astonish was about a tree-like monster attacking the city, and issue 27 had a story of a scientist who accidentally shrunk himself down to the size of an ant. Those characters were Groot and Ant-Man, just not the family-friendly MCU versions yet. And Journey into Mystery introduced a new hero to start fighting off all the fantastical and mythological monsters in the series, Thor. Throughout the years, and as the Comic Code Authority became less and less relevant, Marvel would always come back to the horror well with adaptations of classic horror characters like Dracula and the Invisible Man, as well as introducing anthology series like Chamber of Chills. When Marvel found its footing again with the superhero genre, that seemed to be the main focus for all their titles. Except, superhero comics are only a medium and not a genre. Writers and artists could still tap into the dark and spooky side of comics, from the playfully edgy all the way to the actually twisted and disturbing. We've seen 20th Century Fox go darker with Logan and New Mutants, and we're gonna get the Marvel Zombies animated series and eventually a Blade film and maybe hopefully set up a Midnight Suns team up. But yeah, I just don't see Kevin Feige greenlighting any of these stories for a wider family-friendly audience. So what better way to get into the Halloween month mood than with 5 Marvel horror stories that would be too dark for the MCU? An honorable mention to Doctor Strange Damnation. Set after the events of Secret Empire, Las Vegas was destroyed by Hydra, and after Doctor Strange took back the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme from Loki, Strange tried to bring everyone back, but Mephisto claimed the souls of everyone in Sin City. The entirety of Las Vegas became hell on Earth, and Mephisto turns any Avengers trying to save the city into his own Ghost Riders. So it's up to the Midnight Suns to try to stop the devil in a demon-infested Vegas. Looking at the lineup of Strange, Wong, Blade, Moon Knight, Elsa Bloodstone, Man-Thing, Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, Scarlet Spider, and Dr. Voodoo, my money is actually on this becoming the inspiration for the upcoming Midnight Suns project. So maybe? We probably wouldn't get all the cool Ghost Rider versions of all the heroes though, unless they gave this project Captain America Civil War kinds of money. Number 5. Thor, Prey. So does anyone actually remember the character of Donald Blake? Back in the day, he was Thor's alter ego, as a trial given to him by Odin to judge Thor's worthiness. Thor loses his memories and eventually finds a really cool stick in Norway that gives him his godly powers back. Except Donald Blake was actually a real person in that world, and Thor was basically possessing his body each time he tapped his stick. So whenever they swap places, he needs to go somewhere, right? Eventually the comic writers decided that it was kind of a better story if Thor was just an actual deity fighting on behalf of the mortals, and Don would be forgotten about for a while. Though he did come back for a bit when Thor was temporarily dead, but only for a while, and was put into a dreamlike state by these creatures called the Mares. That is, until Thor Volume 6, Number 9 story of Prey. Thor needs to find out what's going on with Mjolnir since it's losing its enchantment, and nearly anyone can lift the hammer. And as it turns out, Don has been in this waking dream created by horrible monsters for almost a decade. At some point, the Midgard serpent goes into Don's dreams to let him know that everything he knows is actually some sort of Asgardian matrix, and he understandably freaks out. He kills the serpent, steals its powers, and waits for Thor in the dreamscape until he can finally forcibly swap places with him. He goes on a killing spree across Asgard to find anyone who possesses the power of Thor, including poor little Throg. The Asgardians eventually win, and Don is now chained underneath Asgard, crowned the new god of lies, and has venom dripped onto his eyes, which is actually Loki's fate in Norse mythology, and it's always kind of nice when you see that stuff work its way into Marvel. It's more of a psychological horror than any outright spooky one, but yeah, the heroes were basically using this dude as a pawn in their own games, tossed him into what would eventually be a nightmare world forever, and then tortured him for it. That, and I mean, the MCU never really had a Donald Blake outside of a single Easter egg in the first film, so it's not happening. Number 4. The Avengers of the Undead. In the Secret Avengers run, Rise of the Descendants, a team of synthezoids are trying to kill the Avengers. Captain Britain's plan is to get an artifact called the Orb of Necromancy, which can give life to anything, and they could just easily defeat the robots. Don't think about it too hard, it's just comic book logic. But that's not the fun part. Captain Britain's father had the orb in Earth 666 to keep it safe. You know, because the main universe is 616? You get it. This entire multiverse is either undead or a monster, And this is all one giant Easter egg to many Marvel horror stories. Captain America is a werewolf like he briefly was in issue 405. Punisher is Frankencastle. Spider-Man is Man-Spider. Daredevil is a demon like Hellspawn who took his role in the 90s. Brother Voodoo is in ghost form. Wolverine is the Lord of Vampires, just like in the What If issue. And Thor became the Accursed, kind of like Malekith in the main storyline, but also a mummy. And Black Widow and Hawkeye just became animal versions of themselves. I don't know, Black Widow with a spider head is just so dumb and I love it. Hawkeye, Captain Britain, and Beast must steal the orb from an undead celestial, evade the Avengers of the Undead, and get back to the main universe to stop the robot uprising. There's nothing too off limits in this run, even though Valkyrie and Agent Venom did get steamy. All their bits are tastefully blocked out, of course, because if they're gonna go very adult in one aspect, they might as well embrace and go all in on making this issue mature. Yet, safe for work. I just really love the implications of this universe and would love to see them make a comeback. If the Avengers of the Undead were to show up, it'd just be a brief cameo in Secret Wars or something. Well, if the rumors of Sam Raimi directing the film are true, maybe? Anyways, those three are more on the tame side, but from here on out, we're getting to the actual nightmare fuel, so you've been warned. Number 3, Fantastic Four Road Trip. For all of the faults of the fan four-stick film, and trust me, there were many.
Hey, clobber in town.
Mr. Feeney, who wrote this garbage?
It did play with the idea of the kind of body horror that's inherent to the Fantastic Four. In this one-shot issue, it starts off very wholesome. Marvel's first family is just out on a road trip to a cabin near the Grand Canyon to get away from everything. Reed Richards, being who he is, decides to take a quick detour to check out an old meteor impact site to steal some samples. While everyone's asleep, he tinkers with them for no apparent reason, and this lets out a toxic gas that messes with everyone's powers. Ben's skin is still rock, but it scabs off, revealing bleeding tissue underneath. Reed can't control his stretching. Sue's body parts aren't just invisible, but disappearing entirely. And Johnny is now burned by the heat that he creates. Thankfully, the kids are mostly fine. Franklin is just appearing in multiple places at once, and Valeria is just not as smart as she used to be. But yeah, then they all merge into a Cronenbergian blob monster. Don't worry, they're fine by the end. And from what I can gather, this traumatizing event is 100% canon, so just chalk that up to another reason why Reed Richards is the absolute worst. Number 2, Marvel Ruins. Longtime comic readers just know that this one's gonna be on the list. Okay, so how do I begin with this 2-issue limited series? So, it all kind of starts with Marvel's miniseries by Kurt Busiek and artwork by Alex Ross, who is most famous for his beautiful illustrations in the Kingdom Come story at DC. This is actually a masterfully done piece of art, fully painted and printed in prestige format on quality cardstock. We follow Philip Sheldon, just a regular old photographer for the Bugle as he lived out through what would have been our golden age of comic books up until the then present day. From the original android Human Torch fighting in World War II, the formation of the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Avengers in the 60s, even up until Gwen Stacy's death in the 70s. Just ignore the sliding timescale and it's a beautiful story about how normal people react to the superheroes all around them. Marvel's was magnificent and earned 3 Eisner Awards. Marvel Ruins, on the other hand, is essentially a dark parody of that series. Philip Sheldon is investigating the death of the Avengers at the hands of the US government led by President Charles Xavier. Wolverine's skin is peeling off because of the poison of the adamantium, mutations are killing everyone in the country, Hulk is just a bunch of cancerous tumors after the gamma bomb, and Mystique just randomly explodes. I honestly don't think that bit was actually explained, by the way. Like, you know, all of the other random logic jumps for the sake of edginess. Oh, and there's a bunch of cannibalism. And both Thor and Emma Frost started cults. Then it all sort of ends with Peter Parker's spider bite causing an infectious radioactive disease, and Philip just dies. The end. There really isn't any point in any of all this. No deeper meaning, no philosophical analysis of the negatives of the superhero world compared to the original's glorious reading of them. I'm personally not a fan, and it probably wouldn't make a good film anyways because it relies entirely on shock value. But holy crap does that shock value stick with you. Number 1, Immortal Hulk. If I'm being honest, most of these stories are interesting but probably won't be remembered by comic book fans. But Immortal Hulk was a literal game changer and was one of the highest selling series for Marvel, but it does take some context to explain, so give me a sec. Back with the 2012 Marvel Now rebrand, many of our established characters made way for the new legacy characters to take up the mantle. Sure, even when a character was sidelined or quote-unquote killed off, avid readers should have known better that death basically means nothing to the comic book world, and they'd be back with some convoluted nonsense. This is what happened with the Hulk. Bruce Banner took an arrow to the head by Hawkeye, and now the new Hulk was Amadeus Cho. Except, Al Ewing took all of the plot holes and loose threads from all of the Hulk stories up until now and brought the series back to its horror roots, and made it an existential look at what the impermanence of death does to a person, with all the twisted yet expertly drawn transformation body horror, all while also truly breaking down what the relationship is between Bruce, the Hulk, and everyone else inside of them. There are actually several different personalities inside Hulk and Banner. There's the gangster Joe Fixit, the genius Doc Green, the warrior Worldbreaker, and a destructive monster known as Devil Hulk or the Immortal Hulk. Instead of dying regularly, anyone with Gamma inside their body goes to the Green Door instead, and then possibly brought back to life. And as it turns out, Gamma radiation is actually a very powerful demonic magic. And with that, the Immortal Hulk rises from Bruce's dead body. Bruce returns having no idea what happens at night because he doesn't have a hand on the wheel like it's kind of described in the MCU. Bruce dies constantly throughout this run, yet he always returns to the Green Door, but so does all of his Gamma-infused enemies. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the finest work made by Marvel in the last few years, and it's a damn shame that this is way too out there to be adapted into the family-friendly MCU, but if I could give any recommendations for comics to pick up, it's definitely this one. And that's my list. I know there's plenty more horror comics that I would have loved to include on this list, but I want to hear what you guys would have put on here. Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this week's video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more weekly content on comic books and nerd stuff. I've been Eric, and you've been awesome.